So good morning. We got our technical genius here, Michael. And so hopefully all of you in virtual world are receiving this transmission. And then we have the beautiful maybe 20 so folks here sitting with your masks on in respect for what we're all going through on the planet right now. To live carefully, mindfully, safely, respectfully. Being positive, but yet not being so positive that we deny the reality of what's happening all around us. And so it's very wise to be careful in this world. I only take the mask off in order to do this presentation, and as soon as it's over, I will don the mask again. And we are even speaking about when we go shopping to wear double masks so we can be extra careful. And I think it's prudent at this time, until we get a vaccine, until we get vaccinated, that we be hyper-vigilant. I was speaking in our revealing service to so many that arrived this morning, and almost without exception, Thanksgiving celebration has been modified to a great degree. Simplified. And even one young man told me that if the family wants to meet, he's going to go out and try to feed people who need help. And I think each of us has to navigate in whatever way we feel is appropriate for us, and respecting and honoring everybody's journey along the way. And so I invite you to take responsibility for the one thing that you do possess, which is your personal attitude and how you bring yourself to the world. Knowing that the answer is not in finding the right person, but in being the right person. So who am I being during this time on the planet? Am I being the safe one, the respectful one, the cautious one? Am I being the peaceful one, the loving one, the compassionate one? Am I being the hopeful one, the optimistic one, and the one who can see the potential and possibility that in this very dark time, perhaps the light is the brightest, and we could hitch our wagon to a star, as Emerson would say, to hitch our consciousness to an illuminated idea. The idea that perhaps all of this has come to awaken humanity. Neale Donald Walsch said he would never write another Conversations with God book after he finished the third book. But then, all of a sudden, comes out book number 4. And a dear friend called me this week and said he was told by God within to write the 4th book. He says, because humanity needs to wake up. We need to wake up to our role here on this planet. How we shape consciousness by who we choose to be and how we perceive this world. And when we can be the bringers of the light, when we can enter into a field of possibility, then we can transform this world by consciousness itself being renewed and refreshed and revitalized, letting it bring us together in a consciousness of oneness. It is said that there are 2 kinds of people on this world. Those who believe there are 2, and those who don't. And if you don't believe there are 2, then you recognize that there is one life. And that life is sacred. It includes all of the 10,000 things, as they say in Taoism. All life is sacred in the one life. You heard me mention 2 weeks ago that a young lady showed up with a glass container, and in that were 2 cocoons of what she told me she believed were swallowtail butterflies. And she invited me to take it home and to watch them as they birth themselves. This morning was the 2nd week, and I was sitting at the breakfast table looking in the jar, thinking nothing had happened, and all of a sudden, at the top of the jar, I saw a beautiful swallowtail butterfly with her indigo wings, and they were just gently moving up and down, and I went, holy cow, what do I do now? And so as I choked on my breakfast food, I lifted the lid off, and I saw her gently move from the top of the lid over to the flower on the crown of thorns plant in the window. And there she rests, drinking the nectar from the flower. And I witnessed her beauty. It says in the Quran, "Am I not your Lord?" This is from the Creator. To which we, the creation, says, "Yes, we witness you." And so as a humble bystander, I was witnessing the miracle and the beauty of something as humble as a fragile butterfly leaving a cocoon and stepping onto the flower of life. Could we open and witness the mystery and the beauty of something as simple as that, knowing that we're not separate from that, and let that simple act inform us on how to be in this world? The willingness to step off of something we had identified with perhaps as our place of safety, only to step into something totally foreign and yet find that there is nurturing there. There is a flower to greet us with her nectar. And even though we have never seen this flower before, we can trust in that life is here for us. And so during these turbulent times, could we affirm, just like that little butterfly, that life is here for me? If I am willing to step off the familiar into the unknown, and yet know that in that unknown place, there is the wisdom and the beauty of life to assist me, so that I might assume the consciousness that's required for the next phase of life. I was told by a dear friend, the lady who gave me these cocoons, that their lifespan is 2 weeks. And then I heard the voice within my heart saying, 2 weeks are just fine. She has 2 glorious weeks to live in this world, to procreate, to lay some eggs, to drink from the flower of life, and to flutter and flutter and flutter wherever her heart should take her. Could we embrace our life with that same kind of certainty, however long we have, that we get to step off the familiar into the great unknown and know that we are safe, that we are supported and guided, and that inherent within life itself is the wisdom to know how to navigate. We don't have to have all the answers. We can surrender to life itself, knowing that she will guide us and lift us up on eagle's wings. And so when you are ready to step into the flow with me, I invite you to put your hands over your heart and feel that heart connection that we all share. If you're willing to open your eyes and look out from the windows of your soul, knowing that you only see yourself wherever you go. And if you're looking out and you're seeing the beauty, if you're seeing the face of God, it's because you're looking through the eyes of God. And that's how it works. Isn't it sweet? And so in your true octopus butterfly fashion, open your wings, let your butterflies wiggle a little bit, know that you are alive and you are well and you're ready to explore the great unknown. You know, people I think are kind of nauseated with me talking about my octopus teacher, because that silly little movie kind of transformed me in realizing that interspecies relationships can happen. It was a documentary. And then when the butterfly emerged this morning at the breakfast table, I realized that what if it's all a one big butterfly collection, or octopus life teaching us our interconnectedness with one another. This morning we were walking downtown with the dogs, and it's always like a ghost town on Sunday morning, and the pug was cold and he was shaking in his stroller, So I took off my sweater and I wrapped him in the sweater. And he looked at me with gratitude as I'm wheeling him around. And then I see people walking by, people on their bikes looking at the pug and laughing. I saw one kid running, and he stopped enough to take a picture of the pug in the stroller. So we don't know how we're going to impact one another. I looked up on the wires as I was driving down to church, and I saw a hawk sitting next to a crow. I thought, maybe they're desperate to have somebody for Thanksgiving, and they decided, you're a feathered creature just like myself, maybe we can get along. Tried not to think about it too much, because then you get caught up in the head. My neighbor, I was sharing at the revealing service, he stopped over yesterday morning because his wife had woken up at 3 a.m. She still smoked cigarettes, so went out on the front porch to have a cigarette, and she saw in my front yard a bobcat walking down the sidewalk, going to the water bowl we put out for the dogs, taking a drink. And I'm realizing, well, she needed a drink of water. So maybe we're here to help one another by putting out the water. I noticed in the dog bowls that Trey puts out every day, religiously cleans them, there's 2 dog bowls, that the birds have decided that they're going to bathe in the dog bowls. Now, am I here to tell the birds you can't use the dog bowls, or do we have equanimity in all of this sort of stuff? So when you live in a world where we're all struggling to survive in a strange sort of way, because we have had a lot of drought recently, what if in a simple action like putting out a water bowl, it ripples out in the world? And what if in your own personal life, just by opening your heart, something in you ripples out that can affect the world? This month, I'm basing the talks this month on a book that I've had for years and years. It was written in the 1990s. This is the 2nd edition that came out. And I've always wanted to teach it, never did. So I thought, well, I'll just talk about it. And it's called Living in the Flow of Life by Eric Butterworth. And each chapter is so meaningful. One of the first chapters, and it was the first week I spoke, it was about living from within outwardly. And so much of what we do is we live from the outside in. We let the outside determine how we're going to react instead of respond in the world. And he's saying, could we not react to the outer, but could we respond from the inner, no matter what the outer is? And there's a lot of outer stuff. I was talking to a young lady at the center this morning. She says she doesn't watch the news on TV because it upsets her. But then every now and then you can't avoid the news. My beloved husband was trying to find some romantic Thanksgiving movies to watch. And so there was a big thing in the Huntsville Times. These are the movies out for Thanksgiving. And he says, why don't you read them, Trey? I'd like to watch Hallmark movies, something happy, with tinsel and Christmas trees. And so he found a movie called The Oath on Netflix. And it's about a family reunion. They all get together on Thanksgiving. All the different parts of the family come around the table. And this is at a time, it's like The Handmaid's Tale meets Thanksgiving. You have to sign an oath to be loyal to the government at that time, and if you don't sign the oath, they can come and get you. And of course, this Thanksgiving happy movie turns out to be the movie from hell, where the SS show up at the door and they come to arrest you because you haven't signed the oath. And I said, what kind of happy Thanksgiving movie is that? And then he got a little umbrage that I wouldn't appreciate the movie. He said, so it's a little dark. You need a little dark to bring the light. Not so much. Because I noticed, like even with Vicky, if the outside is really traumatic, and if you are having The Handmaid's Tale come to your own home, I wanted to turn off The Handmaid's Tale. I didn't need to see it. And yet another part of me wants to be able to face that stuff, knowing that this too is a possibility. Gigi reminds me, she came from Germany during World War II, and there was a famous Lutheran minister who said, first they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. And then they came for the gays, and I said nothing. Then they came for the gypsies, and I said nothing. And when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. So what if we don't want to stay blind to what is going on in the world, and yet we want to be coming from that inner place, live from within, not from without. And this is a challenge more than ever in the time. The second week, I spoke about life moves in to go out. Life comes to go. Relationships come into your life to go out of your life. And then if you're like me, someone pounds on your door, haven't seen him in 10 years, they show up with a mask and you say, who are you? And they lower their mask and you say, oh my God, not you. Then they put the mask up and they want to move into your life. And I thought you moved out of my life, but no. And then they're intent on coming into my life, into my home. And I said, no, I'm perfectly fine with isolating and secluding myself. And there's many in the world that can be benefit of you. So could we be okay with things coming in to go out instead of thinking we have to cling to every relationship, to every story, to every grievance? You know, I used to go to a 12-step group called Codependence Anonymous. And I found every time I go there, I got more depressed because everybody identified with their codependency. And I wanted to say, I'm a recovering codependent. I don't want to do that stuff anymore. I don't want that person to come in my house. I have healthy boundaries. I can say, no, you don't need to be here. And I can feel good about that. I don't have to be codependent. So I left Codependence Anonymous because I was victorious. I am no longer identifying with that pattern. So could we let things come into our life to go out of our life? You know, let the religion of your past come in to go out. I am no longer. Someone said they wanted me to join the Masonic Temple. I said, why would you want a gay man in the Masonic Temple? And they said, well, the only rule, David, is you have to believe in God. And I said, well, there you have it. I don't believe in God. How can you say that? You're a minister. I said, I don't believe in anything. I know there is a presence and power that is intimate to all of us. But to think that I believe in it, they said belief comes from the ego. All belief comes from the ego. But to say that I know it intimately is an entirely different thing. Now, if you were to ask me, have I experienced this presence? Usually in those humble moments when I can get out of my way, I feel the grace of that presence. But I don't necessarily believe in it. And when you talk about belief, then you have to go your belief versus my belief versus her belief versus his belief. And I don't want to hear what you believe. I truly don't. You don't want to hear what I believe? Not really. Because that all comes from your ego. And when you evolve and grow, maybe you'll believe something different tomorrow than you believe today. It was my little Zen calendar yesterday that said, all your seeking won't get you anywhere. And yet the paradox is, unless you seek, you won't get anywhere. So it's like this counterintuitive thing. This morning it was Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is this beautiful writer who committed suicide. And she was very fragile. You know, I think of that song, this world was never meant for one as beautiful as you. She was very fragile. And this is what she said this morning on the Zen calendar. She says, look at life and face it square on. Look at life and face it square on, whatever it is, and then love the life that you've been given. Now, sometimes when we look at life square on, we don't like what we see. Yesterday afternoon, my neighbor came over to ask me if I had something he could read at a funeral, because he had to speak at a funeral within 2 hours. And his best friend had committed suicide. He was sitting on the roof of the house. It's on the Huntsville News. He was a disturbed, mentally ill young man. He'd been disturbed much of his life. He was up there with his gun. The suicide prevention people talked him down. But he was so intent on leaving, he couldn't love the life that he'd been given, like Virginia Woolf said. And so he ran at the police with his gun out, and they shot him. They gave him the mercy that he wanted. And so as my friend was doing his catharsis over the garden wall, I said, I have something beautiful for you to read at his memorial service. It's about the eternality of life. It's about seeing the life that never died. It's about affirming that. And then knowing that his life was not in vain. So what if we're asked to see things differently, knowing that they do move through and they move out, but what is impermanent is only the form, and what is permanent is the eternal soul. So it requires that we begin to see things differently. So that was the second week. Life comes to pass. And last week I talked about the healing stream. This healing stream of the presence of God. And Eric Butterworth loves to quote scripture, and he uses Jesus all the time. And I'll start with Jesus in a minute, but Jesus said it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So in other words, it's already been given, this thing called the kingdom. And Jesus' only message was the message of the kingdom. So then you better find out what is the kingdom. And the kingdom in Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, the Aramaic word for kingdom was Malkutha, which means the direct transmission of this presence within yourself, the sovereign counsel of God within you. And he says, you've already been given that. So when we can get into that healing stream, into that presence that's within us, that never left us, it literally will carry us forward. It will guide our thoughts, it will guide our emotions, it will show us how to be in the world. It won't give you answers, because that's not what the soul does. But the soul will show you meaning in whatever arises. And so you understand what Virginia Woolf is saying. Look directly at what life is giving you and see it clearly. Don't go into a place called denial, and then love that life. And right now we've got a lot of change going on the planet. You know, I shared with you last Sunday that one of my favorite sayings is, the only one that enjoys change is a baby whose diaper is dirty. And then I commented, I think we have a country who's been with a dirty diaper for a long time. And I'm thinking we need to change that diaper. We need to stop hating one another. We need to stop calling our neighbor the enemy. We need to learn to accept and to listen and to embrace one another of all walks of life, of all nationalities, of all countries. We need to come together with decency and, with a sense that there's only one life here, and it's time. So could we get kind of playful with this idea of stepping into the healing stream? Stepping into the kingdom of heaven within you. Then we don't look outside for answers, we look within for answers. And we don't even really look for answers, we look for meaning. How can I let this assist me in becoming more compassionate, more loving, more creative? Then it's not a problem. It's never a problem to be fixed. I think since Vicky's been coming back, I feel Sam's like this guardian angel sitting on my shoulder. And he was like instantly, when I came into the center, he was like instantly my best friend. And Sam would show up, and nothing was ever a problem to him. It was always an opportunity. When we bought our old house and the windows were falling out literally from the upstairs, Sam's not a problem. And he came over and we put some new windows in, and we had a gay old time talking about it. And then we went out in nature and we marveled at the butterflies and the trees. And then he met the love of his life, and ever since then I never got to see him again. That's what happens when a man finds a beautiful woman. But this week I'm talking about the art of getting along. Now, it was I think it was in the 1990s, they had the LA riots. I don't know if you remember those. And they were beating up the black people in the streets. This is systemic racism. And a man who was beaten, his name was Rodney King. With tears in his eyes, I can see him saying it. He says, "Can't we all just get along? Can't we all just get along?" And I remember that Sunday I said it in church. Judy was probably sitting right there. And I had some people get angry at me for quoting Rodney King and storming out because I was quoting a black man who said, "Can't we get along?" So here I'm talking about the art of getting along. So what does getting along look like? I remember when, was it John Lewis, when they did the tribute to him after he passed, and they talked about getting your foot off, your knee off our neck. We can't breathe. We've been having a time in our country of suppressing people, suppressing the voice of some of those disenfranchised. Could we learn to listen to them so that we could get along with them, so we could build bridges of reconciliation? Last Sunday I shared with you that I was in South Africa in the year 2000, and I went to Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated for 27 years. And instead of letting it make him bitter, it made him better. And he worked with Desmond Tutu when he was finally released from prison, said we need councils for reconciliation to heal this rift that's between us. Now that, to me, is an enlightened teacher. Not that we need to get revenge, we need to sue the hell out of them. No. We need to come together in a new consciousness where we build bridges, black and white bridges, from heart to heart. So here's what Eric Butterworth says about the art of getting along. It's a long chapter, so I'm just going to read you a teeny bit. He starts off once again by quoting Jesus himself, who said, "The two most important things in the spiritual law are to love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might, and secondly, to love your neighbor as yourself." Now, he prioritized it. First, you love this presence, this everywhere present, the one that knows no other, that we all are aspects of, with your heart, soul, and might. And then to love your neighbor, to love the outer as yourself. Now it's all your neighbor. They're all your children. It's that butterfly, that octopus, they're all my neighbor. The lady that was screaming, saw the bobcat, my neighbor. The friend across the stone wall who was grieving the loss of his friend, my neighbor. Could we love them as ourselves and then bring that higher order of our own Malkutha, the kingdom, that healing stream, could we bring it to them? So here's how he takes this apart. He says, to love God and your neighbor is to establish the points with which you contact life and with which you contact the world. See, the world isn't separate from life. The finite is the infinite at the level of the finite. So could we know that our neighbor is everything? It's that little bobcat that's running down my sidewalk drinking the water. It's the deer that run down the alleyway that people said they've seen. We've got foxes in the drainage ditch. You see the little baby foxes looking. They're all your neighbor. So to love this is to establish these points where you're in contact with life in the world. It's to get into the flow of love. Does that sound too profoundly simple, to get in the flow of love, to love them all? When I was in South Africa, this woman stood up and She's the first woman that spoke at the Parliament of the World Religion. She was a black woman from South Africa, and she had lost all 5 of her children to AIDS. And she said, I want you to know that these are all our children, and that we are all the mother. And I didn't need to hear anything else at that Parliament. I went around thinking every child was my responsibility. When I'd see them piled up and homeless in the streets, I would take them and I'd feed them, and I'd touch them. And they didn't like to be touched by white people. It was very interesting. They would withdraw when you would touch them. He said, it's to get into this flow of love, and you will invariably find it's easier to get along with people when you go along with the movement of the flow. Remember, we're in a flow of life, a flow of love, a flow of acceptance, a flow of beingness. So it's easier to love when you're in this flow. You're not trying to run away from it. You're not turning off the TV and saying, I don't want to know about it. You're saying, okay, there is hurt in this world, and I'm going to step into that flow, and I'm going to bring the love. I'm going to rescue that lost soul. It is a fundamental truth of the universe. There is always a cosmos within every chaos. We're in chaotic times right now. So he's saying there is a cosmos, there is a universe in the midst of the chaos. What if we need to go through chaos to find order? So then when chaos shows its beautiful face, if you've ever cleaned out the garage, you know what chaos looks like. I'm in the process of going through the basement, 25 years of stuff buried in the basement. And yet I'm finding a sense of order by facing it, not running away from it and closing the door and pretending it doesn't exist. So could we find the cosmos in the chaos? And he says there is always enough love to go around, even within the persons involved in bitter disputes. There's enough love to go around, even though they're in bitter disputes. And in this flow of life, there is a potential for peace and understanding and cooperation in every relationship. Isn't that nice to know that there's the possibility that we could find peace in these relationships? I love it when they talk about the Congress coming together, the president-elect creating his cabinet, and to try to create this dialogue across the aisle. Let's learn to get along with one another. I hear Rodney King, can't we just get along with one another? Can't we just be respectful to one another? We have a coronavirus on the planet. Can't we create a strategy for getting out the vaccine to all people and not make it political? Can't we wear a mask and be respectful and not make that a political issue? Can't we do this just out of respect for one another? It's a question that you might want to ask. And Lao Tzu, the great founder of Taoism, he says, whoever flows as life flows has solved the human equation. Whoever flows as life flows. We're going through some kind of turbulent waters right now. Maybe we're going down the chutes. Sometimes we're in an eddy. I feel like I'm in an eddy. We're going round and round and round, and something needs to come and break this water jam. But it's the art of getting along. This is what I'm speaking about this Sunday. Is not a psychological gimmick by which to love the unlovable and to communicate with the incommunicable. It is not simply adjusting to or making the best of this human perversity. Someone said they look to me to be a positive person. I can't always be positive when things are really perverse and things are really not where I would feel that our country needs to be. I heard a judge in Pennsylvania saying what's going on right now is like Frankensonian. Or not Frankensonian, what's his name? The Frankensteinian. Frankensteinian. It feels like the Frankenstein monster, what we're creating in this country. And I thought that's a metaphor that I can relate to. It does feel like Frankenstein's on the loose in this country. The art of getting along is not a psychological gimmick where you're supposed to love the unlovable or communicate with the incommunicable. It's not simply adjusting to or making the best of human perversity, but rather this getting along relates only secondarily to the other person. It's not about the other person. It's never been about the other person. Remember, you heard me say that the answer is not in finding the right person out there, but in being the right person yourself. So am I being part of the solution, or am I being part of the problem? Am I being the peace that passes all understanding, or am I being the neurosis that lives in chaos and judgment and fear and anxiety? So who am I being? He's asking that question. Getting along relates only secondarily to the other person. So primarily it refers to getting along with the reality of your own self and the determination to keep the channels of consciousness free from any and all obstructions, to be the best me that I can. I love myself the way I am. There's nothing I need to change. I'll always be the perfect me. There's nothing to rearrange. I'm beautiful. I'm capable of being the best me I can. So could we love that best me that we can be and offer that to the world? That's what he's saying. So getting along is about being who you want to be and then bringing that to the Thanksgiving Day celebration. So that's it in a nutshell. He finally says, this is his affirmation. He says, I go forth in a joyous certainty that whatever person or situation may come to me on this day, it will be good, for I will be in a flow of good. And if I should have even a fleeting moment of concern, I will simply let go and let flow. If I have a moment where I'm contracting and reacting and judging, I'll let go and I'll let that flow of breath, let that flow of awareness, let that flow of so. Just get real simple. So. Someone is flipping me off on the highway. So they must be having a bad day. So someone's screaming at me because they're da-da-da. So they must be upset. I don't have to take on their karma. So when the catastrophe stuff goes on the outside, I can smile on the inside and say, I don't want your karma. I saw a Sadhguru say this to a neurotic woman who was trying to dump all her pain, all her story on a Sadhguru, and he says, Madam, I don't want your karma. And in that holy instant, I realized I too can say that. When someone tries to give me this awfulizing and this catastrophizing, I can't even say the word, that a friend of mine reminded me, we can go there if you want, but I choose not to. And that's what he's saying. To get along with the world, we got to get along with ourselves. I was sharing with the folks here before we started the camera. I've been humming this song I learned from a kid. I can't get it out of my head. It says, how does it go? Before I met you, gonna get along without you now. I was fine without you. Before I met you, gonna get along without you now. So what if we could get along without that part of us that catastrophizes and awfulizes? I can get along without the naysaying, codependent self that's always trying to fix the world. I don't have to fix the world anymore. I can get along without that well. And then I can offer the world what I do have to offer, which is this simple, sweet, loving presence. So I asked myself, who would be the greatest one who practices the art of getting along? And of course I thought of Dao Pooh, Winnie the Pooh, who got along with all the people in Pooh Corner, Crazy Eeyore and Rabbit and Christopher Robin. And there's something about the simplicity of Winnie the Pooh. They call him the empty block. There's not much going on in his head, so he couldn't be worried and thinking about a whole lot of stuff. But then Pooh had expressed, the main thing that I have to get along with is my own self, the self that I've condemned, the self that somehow I've made wrong. And he did it in a very childlike way. So I want to just give you a tiny taste of how Winnie the Pooh would practice the art of getting along. He says, sooner or later, we're bound to discover something about ourselves that we don't like. And he says, but once we see that they're there, we can decide what we want to do with this part of ourselves that we don't like. Do we want to get rid of this completely and change it into other things? Or could possibly we use these parts of ourselves that somehow we've condemned and let them be beneficial? There's an inner jerk in all of us. Could that inner jerk be someone to help you when you need an inner jerk? I think that's what Pooh is saying. He says the last two approaches are often especially useful since they avoid head-on conflict and therefore they minimize struggle. You're not fighting these parts of yourself. You're embracing these parts. And he says also, they allow us to transform these characteristics to be added to a list of things that we have inherently here to help us. So our anger can help us. It can be righteous anger. Our fear can help us. It can guide us away from unsafe things like wearing masks and not stepping. My partner was up in Franklin, Tennessee, and every now and then he likes to get his pedicure and manicure done, especially when they do it from Cambodia, one of those Asian countries, because they give these beautiful massages to his calves and his feet, and he's kind of spoiled that way. So he goes into a pedicurist, manicurist store in Franklin, Tennessee, and he said, I forgot to bring my mask. And they say, we don't wear masks here. And he says, see you later. Yeah, could we use our common sense in a similar manner? Instead of struggling to erase what are referred to as negative emotions, we can learn to use those negative emotions in positive ways. Negative emotions in positive ways. So when someone says to me, I look to you to be positive, sometimes it can be negative, but that's a positive too. Because sometimes no is the new yes. When I said no to that person who was pounding on my door that wanted to come in, I was saying yes to myself. I'm perfectly fine in my house with my mask and my 2 old dogs. So Winnie the Pooh goes on to finally conclude, in the story of the ugly duckling. He says, when did the ugly duckling stop feeling ugly? And this is Pooh, he says, when he finally realized that inside himself was a swan. Now each of us has something special, a swan of some sort. This is the wisdom of Pooh. And it's hidden inside of us somewhere. But until we recognize that it's there, what can we do but splash around and tread water? He says, the wise are who they are, and they work with what they've got, and they do what they can do. So the first thing we need to do is recognize and trust our own inner nature, that kingdom of heaven that Jesus spoke about, that Malkutha, and not lose sight of it, no matter what's going on in the world outside. For within us is, for without might be an ugly duckling, but within is a beautiful swan. Inside, a neurotic Tigger is a rescuer who knows the way. And in each of us, there is that something special that we need to keep and treasure and value. So Winnie the Pooh is saying, instead of judging yourself as somehow inferior or flawed, could those flaws be your own holiness, your own sacredness? And then, it's interesting. We've been shaming ourselves way too long. You know, when I had the heart attack, it was a great gift because it gave me permission to do this inner work on this inner healing. You know, there's a waking up and there's a waking in. I hadn't gone within to those unhealed parts of myself. And just like Pooh said, instead of me shaming those parts, could I bring them into the light and see that they are the best part of me? And in order to do that, I studied with a man named Jeff Foster. And here's how he takes Winnie the Pooh's simple idea and he takes it to right there in your own heart. And it's kind of painful to read, but it's very powerful because it is very healing. And this is how he says it. He says, we cannot destroy. This is about our own abandoned little self within ourselves. We cannot destroy or cut out this little inner one. He or she is only crying out for the love that they never received in their childhood. This is the part of us that we've exiled. He says, the more we try to destroy him, the more he tries to destroy us. So it's not about getting rid of little Miss Catastrophaki or Mr. Negativity or Mr. Fearful. He says the more we try to destroy them, the more he tries to destroy us. And what we fear and fight in ourselves will only grow that in power. So we stop the inner war, stop the battle. And then he says great healing can happen when we let go of our mind-made ideals and turn to face our own living truth. Get out of the belief system. Get out of your preferences. Get out of your strong-held opinions. And he says, and discover a living truth that's underneath all of that you're an eternal being, and you're here to make the best of this life, whatever it is. So he says, we admit that we're not full of love and light and bliss, like so many people would say, oh, just send love and light and the bliss of your being. Well, what if you're not in that love and light and bliss, he says. And we pretend to be in that place. He says, but we're full of struggle today, and there are days of struggle that people are facing. I see it on the news, which I turn off, and I turn it back on, and they're still struggling. So this admission is like the death for the ego, because the ego doesn't want to admit that it's struggling. It's a terrible defeat for the forces of fear and repression, but an absolute relief for our authentic self. It's okay to be lost. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to feel like, I don't know what the hell's going on in this country. It's okay to feel that way. You're not alone. And then we can come together. Anne-Marie is like my bulwark that way. When I feel frightened, she always reminds me we'll get through this. And just in that little phrase, whether she means it or not, I know that we will get through it, one way or another. He says, we invite all the buried rage up into consciousness so we can finally meet it. And we connect with this furious little inner one, and we hold him or her in our arms at last, and we let them exist and live and express in safe ways. It's okay for you to feel unsafe. And we ask him what he needs deep down. When I asked my little boy what he needed, he just wanted to be held. He just didn't want to be exiled anymore. He didn't want to be shoved in the basement, hiding out for fear. If I came out, it might be a scary place. He wanted to come out. So does he feel unloved, disappointed, sad, or forgotten? Does he feel neglected, abused, abandoned, and unsafe? What vulnerability was the rage in you trying to bring your attention to? And he says, let us shower this precious little one inside with a fascination, with an abiding attention. And let's give him a home and a voice. I'm going to listen to you now. You know, this is how we can get along with our neighbor and those that we feel are on the other side of the equation. So, he no longer controls us because now we're finally listening to him. We're finally being a parent and not a slave. You know, I'm here to hold you in my arms, and not to make you wrong and try to exile you and shove you into some kind of slavery. When we befriend our anger, when we breathe into this, when we soothe it with a kind awareness, there can be great joy, and it is the joy of true intimacy with ourselves. I can love that little part of me that I thought was somehow flawed, like Pooh said. And we may discover there is a peace that is not the opposite of anger, but it is right there at the core of anger. I'm mad as hell, and yet I can still be at peace. You know, there's a certain amount of anger at all this stuff that's going on in the planet right now, and yet I know that peace is the law of my life. And yet anger can coexist with that. The peace that comes from holding ourselves close and celebrating all that we are, celebrating the great power of anger, which rises intelligently to protect us from harm, whether it's perceived or actual. It's very interesting. Every now and then I like to watch Judge Judy. And Eric Butterworth talks in his lovely book, Living in the Flow. He says some people that are angry, they'll have a fist like this. And he says, just close your fist and feel what that feels like. And then he says, and then open your hand and feel what that feels like. So on a Judge Judy episode, this man was suing another man because he had broken his jaw. And so the man that was suing him said, this man broke my jaw. And so he had a video, and they were in a bar, they'd been drinking, and the man came up that he was suing, and he reached out his hand like this to shake his hand. And the other man went like this and hit him in the jaw and broke his jaw. And so Judge Judy said, excuse me, but you may say that he came at you with a violent act, but I see him as reaching out his hand to shake your hand, to which you take your fist and shove it in his face. And she says, the picture speaks 1,000 words when you can't say, well, he was my enemy. And so the question is, are we carrying the fist to the world, or are we carrying the open hand to the world? When our neighbor shows up, and maybe we don't agree with them. And so let those who have ears to hear, hear. How are we being? What are we bringing to the equation? The very last thing he says in this, he says, anger is not bad. It's not wrong. It's not a sign of weakness or failure. It's a precious orphan child that's knocking on the doorway of the present moment, and it's longing to be let in. So you know what I love about anger? And we're talking about, I studied with Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh, he said when his anger would arise, he would say to it, with an open hand, not with a fist, he would say, oh, there you are, my little anger. Or there you are, my little fear. You're not bad. It's that righteous anger that Jesus spoke about. You know, when people lock up children and put them in cage, it makes me angry. Could I let that anger then motivate me into some action? How can I help them and find a recourse for them to be out of that cage? So could we let that holy anger transform us and take us into a loving action? I think that's how we ultimately experience the art of getting along. First getting along with ourselves, then getting along with our neighbor, knowing that the neighbor is your own self. And when they come with their frightened child, like my neighbor did yesterday after the suicide, hopefully I gave him my open-hearted awareness, my peaceful place, and we stood there and talked about how painful life is for someone. And we actually talked about suicide. And you know, I've had a number of people have taken their lives on my watch. And every time I experience it, I realize they must have been really suffering in order to do that action. I know at a certain time in my life, I was experiencing so much emotional pain that the only recourse I could think of was a physical pain. And Gigi understands that, she's been there. So could I then have compassion for others when they exhibit that same kind of pain? And had that pain been met with compassion, maybe outcomes would be different. You know, they were in my case. You know, I finally found that my emotional pain was finally met by not running away from it, but by acknowledging that it was there. So the art of getting along has to start within, and then it reaches out outwardly. So we're facing our Thanksgiving in a couple of days. So let me do a little closing meditation to establish us in that open-hearted, open hand. And you might even want to just sit in your chairs and lift your hands up in a receptive mode. If you look at the symbols of the Buddha, he's sitting there usually with a small smile on his face. So I invite you to find the Buddha smile. And not only let your lips smile, but let your kidneys smile, let your liver smile, let your heart smile. And feel the alchemy of the smile. And now if you would, place your hands in an upright position on your lap, opened, and that's a gesture of receptivity. that I'm open and receptive to the grace of this moment, to the peace of this moment, to the love inherent within this moment. Now, you can counter that by just making a fist and say, I'm going to get even with those fingers, and you can see what that feels like, and then gently you can just open the hands up. And so we can choose whether we're going to clench our fist at life or whether we're going to practice the art of getting along. First with the moment, with our body, with our breath, with our mind. Getting along with your mind can be real challenging sometimes. And that's why we practice meditation, to realize that we are not a victim of the mind. We have a mind, but who we are precedes the mind. And so when we move into that original nature which precedes thought, we're free. We're aware, we're fully present, and yet we're not thinking. We're not obsessing on any opinion or belief or judgment. They may arise like clouds, but we're not clenching our fist around those clouds and calling them my belief and my judgment. Rather, we're observing, there you are, judgment. There you are, anger. And in that, we practice the art of getting along, of moving along, of letting go and letting flow, of being the person that offers open-hearted awareness to the world. Loving God as our own self, that magnanimous presence that's unlimited in every way, and that is what we are. And then loving our neighbor as ourselves, knowing that there's only one here. And so there is not you and the neighbor, there is just that one life reflected back in one another. And so when we see the beauty in the neighbor, it's the beauty that's looking through our eyes. And when we see the enemy in the neighbor, it's the enemy that is looking through our eyes. And so we take dominion over our life by taking responsibility for our life. And then we hear Virginia Woolf's beautiful words this morning on the Zen calendar. Look in the face of life. Look in the face of life. And give thanks for this life that you've been given. We rest in that gratitude. And we know that we carry this forward throughout this Thanksgiving Day holiday as an expression of the one, the peace of the one, the joy of the one, the unlimited possibilities of the one creative intelligence operating easily, effortlessly through our hearts and our minds and our souls. When you're ready to step out into the world, step off the cage of familiarity into the flower of possibility, like that little butterfly is doing in my living room. Put your hands over your heart. Open your eyes. And join with me in the heart salutation that says, I honor you.
I honor you.
I respect you.
I respect you.
I love you.
I love you.
You are the deepest aspect of myself.
You are the deepest aspect of myself.
The beloved kingdom of heaven within me
The beloved kingdom of heaven within me
bows to the beloved kingdom of heaven within you.
bows to the beloved kingdom of heaven within me.
In this sacred place we are one.
In this sacred place we are one.
Namaste.
Namaste.
That's the Namaste consciousness. And when you're ready to be that and celebrate that in the world, thank you for sending in your tithes. There are pens in the basket for those of you who didn't get them. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you